I'm going to start this off by talking about the voting percentage of African Americans in Mississippi during the 1960s. 6.7%. Yeah, that's not going to cut it. So I, as well as many other people, decided to take a stand and do something about it. My name is Robert Moses, and Freedom Summer changed my life. For generations, African Americans were put at the bottom when it came to their voting rights. The poll taxes, literacy and comprehension tests. It just wasn't fair. In 1960, I became the field secretary for an organization I helped create called the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC for short. This committee had tons of supporters in the North that would help raise funds for their work in the South. In 1961, we waged campaigns to try and register Black voters, and the amount of conflicts we had to go through were disgraceful. There was so much violence, racism, and hatred. I myself was beaten on the head and face. There were 30 bombings, 35 church burnings, 35 people shot and 80 beaten. And that was only in Mississippi. Then we had CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality, which was one of the leading organizations in the civil rights movement. CORE was what actually started the Freedom Rides, which were bus trips throughout the South to help with segregated bus terminals. Our original group left DC on a Greyhound bus to reach Louisiana in 1961. They were met with an angry mob of 400 white people who threw a bomb into the bus. Thankfully, our riders were able to escape, only to find themselves beaten by the members of the mob. At one point, CORE officials couldn't find anybody to transport the riders, but eventually another activist piled together a group of 10 students to continue on. The violence during these rides were immense. Our riders were beaten, they were arrested, but finally, a breath of relief came in the fall of 1961 when the Interstate Commerce Commission issued regulations prohibiting segregation in the interstate transit terminals. In April of 1964, the MFDP, Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, was created when we challenged the formation of the all-white Mississippi Democratic Party, which only allowed participation from whites when in fact 40% of the population was African American. Now, on June 15th of 1964, when Freedom Summer had officially began, the first 200 people showed up. But we started off on a bad note. Just the second day, 3 of our volunteers were reported missing and eventually found dead. The rest of our volunteers, they were scared. 3 of us had been murdered, and I knew I had to do something. So I gathered them all together and I told them that this is what we're up against. I told them that because they've seen all what could happen firsthand, they had every right to go home, that I wouldn't blame them for wanting to leave. Nobody moved. Each one of them, scared half to death, stayed. Now this project brought so much pain and suffering, but it was only the beginning of what we're sure to change. It's May of 1964. And the Civil Rights Act is under attack by segregationists in Congress. A couple days later, I asked my parents to join Freedom Summer. My name is Andrew Goodman, and I was murdered. My story, I was with James Chaney, who was Black, and Michael Schroeder, who was white, and we were sent out to investigate a church bombing in Philadelphia. Now, on our way back to Meridian in our station wagon, which was known as a court vehicle, that's when we were stopped and arrested. The Neshoba County Sheriff, Cecil Price, took us back to the Philadelphia jail and told us we had to sit and wait in jail for the Justice of Peace to come and issue our speeding fine. Now, the standard procedure for court organizers, for the people that don't show up on time or don't come back at all, is to call local police stations and jails nearby. And that's what they did. But apparently, we were never there. Price came back at around 10 p.m. that night, issued our speeding fine without the Justice of Peace, and told us to leave the country. After that, we were never seen again. This entire case blew up. It took 44 days for federal search teams to find us. 44 days. They found dozens of murdered African Americans, but they couldn't find us. Eventually, the FBI found us buried beneath a 15-foot dam on August 4th of 1964. This entire case blew up. We got so much national attention and support. Now, I mentioned the color of their skin a little while ago because do you think the outcry of the public would have been the same if all of the victims were Black? That's what the volunteers were thinking and feeling. After that, the Black and white workers stopped trusting each other because they realized that the only reason they were getting all of this national attention and support was because 2 of the victims were white. And that just added a conflict to what seemed like a never-ending project. My name is Fannie Lou Hamer, and Freedom Summer was a season to remember. Now, I remember a couple of young civil rights workers came to Ruleville, which is where I lived after I married Perry Hamer. They were looking for local black people to convince their neighbors to register to vote. And that's when I knew I found my calling. For the rest of my life, I would work in the civil rights movement. After that meeting, 17 other local people and I went down to the Williams Chapel Church on August 31st of 1962 to try to register to vote. There were men with rifles in the back of their pickup trucks walking around the courthouse. We didn't get registered that day. And that day I lost my job as a timekeeper on the Marlowe plantation of 18 years. Now the people I were with, they were scared. And so I started to sing. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. And my singing was what actually introduced me to the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. The year was 1963, and that's when I became the field secretary for that committee. A couple months after that, we went down to South Carolina for a training school. And on our way back, we made a pit stop in Mississippi. We walked into a cafe, and a highway patrolman came and tapped us on the shoulders and said, "Y'all, get out." One of the members of the group reminded him that it was against the law to refuse to service us. But he said, "Ain't no dang law, y'all just get out." On our way back to the bus, that member wrote down the number of the license plate of that police car and was arrested. Now I went out to see if we should continue on, and that's when I was arrested too. And after that, that police officer had 2 other black prisoners beat me and a 15-year-old because he wouldn't say sir to the men. Now let's fast forward to 1964 when more young white and black people came to join our efforts of getting voter registration. We decided to magnify the discriminations that blacks faced by challenging the all-white Mississippi delegation that would be chosen to represent the state at the National Convention in New Jersey. We held our own meetings. We selected around 68 people to represent us. Aaron Henry from Clarksville, who was a long-time NAACP activist, which stands for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, he headed the delegation, and I was in the vice chair. And that's when we called ourselves the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. Now, it was said I gave a pretty intense presentation. I talked about my jail time and how I was beaten. And I told them what we wanted. We wanted to register, to become first-class citizens. And they tried to compromise by giving the MFDP 2 seats on the Democratic Party. But that's not what we came here for. That's not what we were fighting for, so we rejected. But we continued on. In the fall, we challenged the seating of the 5-member congressional delegation and made a clear statement that because blacks were kept from voting, the election was unfair. In 1965, 3 of us, including myself, were given guest seats in the House of Chambers, but the House of Representatives rejected us. All of these conflicts leading up, building on, we kept going, we kept fighting because we were determined. I knew Freedom Summer was gonna be tough, and things got crazy. But I said, and I know we all followed, I'm gonna be standing up, and I'm gonna be moving forward. And if they shoot me, I'm not gonna fall back. I'm gonna fall 5 feet, 4 inches forward. And ladies and gentlemen, we made a positive impact. We left a positive legacy. And on June 16th of 1965, President Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act, a compromise of banning poll taxes, literacy and comprehension tests, and other things that prevented Southern blacks from voting. In 1966, over 500,000 Southern blacks registered to vote. And in 1968, over 400 black people were elected to office. To me, Freedom Summer was one of the greatest things to ever happen in Mississippi. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I didn't get a chance to read your bibliography thoroughly.
Okay.
The only thing that I question, and it's because of me personally, is my favorite historian in the world who was involved in this, Howard Zinn. I didn't see in there.
Okay.
And he and Fannie were very close. So that might just be a place for you to
Possibly I could do more research.
reach out and pick up a little more information there, just from another perspective.
Okay.
But thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
What drew you to this topic?
Well, one of the biggest things is that while I was researching a lot of topics for me to find, the things that these people had went through, their confidence, their initiative to get what they wanted, really drew my attention because they've gone through so much, and nowadays people take this all for granted, and it hurts me to see that because they fought so much. People died, they were arrested, beaten. So I think just the struggles that they went through and how they pulled out and they reached up on top, it really drew me to the subject.
You mentioned in your paper that you struggled with finding a topic, but you had an interest in the civil rights movement, and that's what centered you in this particular way towards this particular summer.
Mm-hmm.
As you were doing your research, and I'm sure it was robust, not just around this, but other aspects, were there other things about the civil rights movement that you also found interest in and thought you might want to pursue further in another project?
Well, there was definitely a lot of other topics that I could do. This one was the one that caught my eye. The people that I chose to represent, Fannie Lou Hamer, Robert Moses, Andrew Goodman, there were other people that were involved in this, and I think it'd be interesting to dive a little deeper into the other organizers or leaders and figure out like what else they had a part in the civil rights movement, and maybe do another topic about that.
Anything you find really shocking in your research?
Well, a lot of the struggles they went through were pretty shocking, the way that they treated them. One thing actually I did find pretty interesting was that there were black and white workers working together, which you don't see very often back then. And when things started to happen with the national outcry of when 3 of them went missing and were eventually found murdered, that kind of separated the black and white workers. I found that interesting that they even came together in the first place to work on something like that, but they were all headed towards one goal, and they found people from all over, from the North and South, to come together for this one goal. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
Did you, during your research, did you delve into all of the places that the Freedom Riders started from? In the ones that came from the North.
Mm-hmm.
Did it take you from their initial, I believe it was a week-long training,
Mm-hmm.
to getting on that bus?
So like the places that they went to,
Yeah.
and how, yeah, I definitely wanted to figure out how, like where their travels took them. South Carolina, Louisiana, a lot of those places, which they encountered different things as they went there. But the freedom rides in general were really shocking that they were able to travel all these places. And each place brought in a new struggle and a new conflict, just because there's people that do support this and there's people that don't support it. So every time they would go to a new place, you'd always have to combat all of those struggles.
Did it shock you that, I mean, a lot of these were young kids, and sometimes young people can be idealistic of what they're going into. And when they actually got there and saw the conditions and 3 of them being murdered, that none of them turned around and said, I'm going home.
Yeah, I was like really shocked. But I'm like proud almost that they stayed. It was really, really shocking to me. But they were so determined, and they had all these great leaders that were pushing them to go towards this. And I think in the back of their minds, they knew that this was something important and this is something worth fighting for. So all the young kids, and they had freedom schools actually where they taught the little children about what's going on and how they can help, and other places because it was all segregated. So I think they were given that knowledge so that they would continue on and not just think that running away is going to solve anything, but rather to stay and fight.
This kind of tags on, but given that, what do you think are the most prevalent, pervasive lessons of this time period that carry forward to the present day?
One of the biggest things is never to give up. If you have a dream or a goal, you got to keep pushing forward. I know there's going to be struggles and all of us know there'll be conflicts, but eventually a compromise could arise from it. And if you give up, you might not be able to reach your true potential or the goal that you're trying to reach. So definitely not giving up. That was one of the biggest things I'd take away.
Anything else?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I would like to commend you on a very, very nice job of taking a huge amount of information and being able to concentrate that into a beautiful presentation.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for your time.